Great. Well, thank you very much, Thomas and Leah, for organizing the show and this conference. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a compelling show. It's always thrilling to sniff art in a museum. It's kind of still unusual. And after COVID, it's exciting to consider the air as something aesthetic rather than something fearful or full of trepidation. Ah, okay, great. Let's see, so, good. When I began researching and writing about olfactory art in 1996, wow, almost 30 years ago, it was barely an ethereal presence. In fact, the few writings about smell and art at that time, mostly by philosophers trained in a Kantian aesthetic, adamantly sought out to disprove the possibility of olfactory art. I knew they were wrong because I knew the history. There's lots of evidence of artists were using smell, even though it was unacknowledged and under-theorized. The link between scent and art actually has a long history. Representations of fragrant scenes occur in images of many aesthetic styles and in just about all historical periods. One could trace a connection between artists and scent, at least as far back as Leonardo, who had such an abiding interest in fragrance that he listed the practice of court perfumer among his many talents. And this is a distillation device that he designed. He was from a family of apothecaries too, so there's he comes from his interest in scent, honestly. And besides fragrant experiences, we should also consider scent-based imagery and artists' writings infused with aromatic metaphors. Rembrandt's painting on smell is part of a series he did about the allegory of the five senses. And Gauguin's book, whose title is the Tahitian phrase for perfumed or fragrant, contains the memoirs of his time on the island. These examples demonstrate that an olfactory imaginary had been in preparation long before olfactory art emerged in itself. Artists have always been engaged in more diverse media than the traditional art historical canon generally acknowledges. Many modern and avant-garde artists, even when painters and sculptors, delved into what is now considered performance art, installation, multimedia collaborations, and relational works, all of which are conducive to olfactory experiences. Two symbolist theater works, for instance, attempted to include smells. The Song of Solomon arranged correspondences between smells and other components of the play, and A Trip to Japan in 16 Minutes sought to convey the experience of travel via scent. Both projects, however, were frustrated by the inability to disperse perfumes and then clear the air quickly enough, but they stand out as important precedents. A number of reasons, then, delayed the full formation of olfactory art, despite the presence of smell in many artists' writings and artworks since the late 19th century. Primarily, smells were marginalized by the dictates of ocular centrism that infused modernist formalism. It did not help that many of the occurrences of scent by artists during this time were ephemeral, rendering them mostly undocumentable and uncollectible, thus denying olfactory works the advantage provided to objects that could be purchased, preserved, and studied. While avant-garde artists were consistently interested in smells to renew, disorder, extend, and shock the audience's senses, their efforts were often overlooked. At the International Surrealist Exhibition, poet Benjamin Perret diffused the scent of roasting coffee. And the Futurists, who have been mentioned already, staged a restaurant along with writing a manifesto of smell, but their restaurant was called the Holy Palate. With recipes like salami mixed with coffee and cologne, it's no wonder the restaurant was short-lived. By the 1960s, the command of modernist formalism had pretty much been exhausted. Scent notably appeared in many of the anti-modern movements of this time, Happenings, Nouveau Realism, Fluxus, Arte Povera. These movements dealt with real materials, actual sites, and interactive situations, all of which stand as important milestones for olfactory art. Spice Chest on the left uses nutmeg, ginger, and other spices to differentiate the pieces. And for Canellis, pyramids of coffee perched on balances fill the room with fragrance. Yet, olfactory art did not quite materialize in the 60s. For the most part, these works sought to liberate all of the senses from the limitations of modernism. The orientation of these works were too broad to initiate a genre that could be called olfactory art. Smells were certainly featured, but they were often just one component in a spectrum of sensory exploration. However, by the late 1980s, a decidedly olfactory turn in the visual arts could be discerned. That decade brought together several major trends that precipitated what I would call a distinct and cogent genre of olfactory art. First, postmodernism supplanted the modernist scopic regime by emphasizing perception as a fully embodied synesthetic operation. Theorists undermined the ideology of vision as the only paradigm for knowledge and aesthetics. And institutional critique questioned the power structure of galleries and museums, and often abused the integrity of the white cube with sensory-based installations. The end of modernism also affirmed a more pluralistic range of artists and styles. The 1980s and the 1990s included a greater presence of women, artists of color, and those from non-Western locales and traditions, which fostered a fuller range of sensory aesthetics. More diverse sensory cultures arrived too, as the art world underwent a decentering process with the launch of biennials around the world. And some of the notable ones were in Cuba, Istanbul, Taipei, and Cairo. For Neto, bundles of savory spices reflect the cuisines of his Brazilian homeland. And for Montian Bunma, herbs from traditional Thai medicine fill a walk-in tower that audiences can enter. Perhaps the most relevant for olfactory art was the rise of sensory studies, the investigation of the senses from the perspectives of history, anthropology, sociology, feminism, and cultural studies. In particular, Alain Corbin's book, The Foul and the Fragrant, kindled a popular as well as scholarly interest in scent, as did a noteworthy scientific study on smells featured in National Geographic. In popular culture at this time, aromatherapy and scented consumer products also gained notable prominence. While these factors might have precedence in prior decades, it is only in the late 1980s and early 90s that they synchronized to support smell as a viable art form. Issues that blossomed in this period seemed primed to foreground scent: the body, public space, cultural identity, consumerism, sexuality, the environment. To address these issues, artists recreated body odors, dispersed scents into galleries and streets, questioned fragrant cultural symbols, and appropriated commercial perfumes or made their own. Peter Hopkins, for instance, replaced paint with perfume to make works that could be refreshed over and over. And Sissel Tolas made customized fragrances to reflect the multifaceted character of different urban locations. These two might look familiar to some people in the audience. Assisting this incorporation of smell into art was a shift in technology and greater access to the basic elements of a scent practice, such as the raw materials of perfume making, the ability to synthesize artificial scents, and the affordability of new types of diffusers. Perfume companies and scientific laboratories, notorious for their secrecy, began to collaborate with artists, making their expertise and massive scent libraries available for alternative projects. And at the risk of speaking for the artists in the room, who will have time later to expand on their work, but Clara Ursitti created an innovative self-portrait based on her bodily odors, and Osvaldo Mesilla filled a refuse bin with pine soap, perhaps commenting on how real estate developers displaced communities under the dubious rhetoric of cleansing. One might also name Thomas Zitzwitz as an early pioneer in olfactory art. He was also doing works on scent at this time. So together, these factors help to create the conditions for a burgeoning number of distinctly olfactory works, ones in which the smell was consciously and deliberately present, rather than being something just incidental to the work. But number is only one indicator. Artists at this time started to specialize in scent. Rather than just creating a single olfactory work and then returning to their regular practice, artists produced scent works again and again over many years. And Clara, Osvaldo, and Thomas are all still creating scented works. So scent thus became a strategic, career-defining subject and methodology. These artists also studied scent, seeking out training in perfumery, aromatherapy, and olfactory science. These artists also conducted research into scent as well, using art as a venue for investigations or what we now call research creation. And artists also became advocates for smell, or what Sissel Tolas calls olfactivists, and publicly promoted smell as a worthy aesthetic and cultural phenomenon. At the risk of oversimplification, I think there are two fundamental reasons motivating artists to engage with the sense of smell. The first is that scent provides an undeniably raw, unmediated, pure sensation. Instead of representing or picturing an object, odor provides a direct experience. Smell is a presence that is difficult to reproduce or document. If you are not there, you cannot smell the work and thus miss out on the full experience. And in a culture heavily dependent on digital media, the privileging of physical experience serves as an effective counterpoint. The second reason is that however much the sense of smell seems to be raw or immediate, it is nonetheless redolent with strong connotations. Artists are drawn to odors because they are intricately linked to individual identity, lived experience, and cultural sensibility. In other words, scents have meaning. While the meanings of scent vary considerably from person to person and from culture to culture, artists recognize the importance of smell in understanding the complexities of society and the world. So despite the differences between these 2 points, and they are kind of contradictory, these 2 motives often overlap, for smells can operate simultaneously as a sensation and a concept, a stimulus and a sign. And such a contradiction is fruitful for artists. I think that incense is kind of making my throat a little raw. Just in time for a Chinese New Year. So to understand the range of olfactory art, here are a few types of potentials of smell that artists draw upon. Smells originate in matter and thus confirm the authenticity of the stuff composing the real world. Such works often harbor an ecological edge. They aim to reconnect alienated urbanites to the sensuous vitality of the environment. They also reconnect with the natural cycle of smells. Organic substances undergo decomposition and then become the basis for the next generation of living things. So in these 2 works by Meg Webster, there's a spiral of pine branches that becomes this very fragrant walkway. And in Butterwall, she put several pounds of butter on the wall and left it to decompose over the 1-month length of the show. And the surprising thing was that the gallery tenants actually found that it had a pleasant scent. One would assume that, it must have been awful. But no, decomposition is not something to fear. Another kind of potential is related to mood, and the fact that smells can induce subtle fundamental changes in perceivers' moods and emotions. Such intimacy destabilizes the detachment central to visual-based aesthetic theories. For Leib, beeswax has recuperative powers to relax the mind, reduce stress, and support meditation. And Huller's work showcases a plant that emits a chemical similar to human pheromones, thus stimulating the feeling of being in love. Some might question whether such mood alterations are beneficial or coercive, and they do raise ethical questions. And maybe we can get back to that sometime later in the symposium. One of the interesting aspects of sensory works is what I call sensory interrogation. And most olfactory works bring together several media and senses. Instead of merging in a unified way, something like synesthesia, these works contrast the senses with each other, what I call dysesthesia, and so perform an interrogatory function. So these works question the perceptual decisions that inform our cognitive understandings. Il Vapore shows two versions of the same action, boiling eucalyptus tea. While the video may be able to bridge the expanse of time, what it loses is made palpably evident by the intense aroma suffusing the room. And if you know the smell of eucalyptus, it's really quite strong and pungent. In Annika Yee's installation, sticking one's head into the dryer brings uncertainty about the connections between what one is doing and what one is smelling. The scents are designed to speak about loss, both emotional and environmental. But there's two different scents, and so it's kind of a challenge then to figure out which one is which. Artists have also been probing the myths about smell and perfume and question the cultural meanings of scent. And there are phenomena like the Proust phenomenon, where smells serve as a springboard for memory and autobiography. For Dennis Oppenheim, a vat of turpentine serves as a stimulant for recollections about being a painter in art school. Turns out he hated painting. The mystique of perfume is another trait that artists investigate. Mark Lewis sprayed women's perfume in the men's bathroom and men's cologne in the women's, inquiring into the role of scent in the ideology of gender. Unfortunately, people didn't seem to notice the difference though, but if Axe body spray had been around at the time Lewis created this work, I think it would have been very evident. Scent works also involve relationality and community. When inhaling aromas, audiences become aware of their relation in space. Smell collapses rigid dichotomies of viewer and object, self and other. When people share a fragrance, olfaction brings about a communal feeling. For Weirkrit, cooking and serving food is a means to break down barriers and to set up convivial situations where relationships can flourish. And for Brobasis, electronic noses help to identify pollution hotspots so that residents can make their communities both cleaner and healthier. Social critique is another aspect of sensory works. And Rise utilized odors to intervene into the cycle of real estate speculation. It channeled the smell of baking into an exhibition sponsored by a condo developer who had just bought a building and evacuated all of the Chinese tenants. So the artist reintroduced a fragrance symbol of those who had been recently evicted. Gallery goers were thus became aware of the politics of space, radically changing the neighborhood. So the smells from the bakery go right up to the show, and then the audience members come down to the bakery to find the source and then start to talk to the community. Now, most germane, I guess, to the show today is olfactory works looking at dematerialization and denying the objecthood as a necessary element for art. Inevitably, they foreground air as a medium in itself. So artists that we know, who's in the show, Teresa Margolles, uses the water from the washing of corpses to make a mist that fills a room and forces visitors to confront preconceptions about death. In that work, there was a sign posted outside of it telling people what they were experiencing. So they had to make a choice whether to enter into the room, knowing that it was this autopsy water. And in Lozano Hemmer's work, Air is recycled from people's breathing and gathered in a toxic cubicle, reminding visitors to appreciate the value of fresh air for survival. And then lastly, I'd like to talk about art as olfactory research. Olfactory artworks can be open-ended experiments in which scientific methodologies are engaged, such as interviews, surveys, smell walks, and other scientific methodologies. This smell map by Jenny Marketu urged visitors to record the scents of the city. Gallery goers walked around the neighborhood and then posted their sensations to build a collective representation of smells in the city. I should say that a lot of these works I'm showing are ones that either I've written about or curated, and this was a show that both Clara and Oswaldo, the same show we're in. So there are several practical and conceptual issues arising from smell-based works. There's a primary challenge for olfactory art is the type of display space available at most museums and galleries, the white cube. Such spaces are designed for a visual logic and are often inhospitable places for smells. While a sanitized space can be useful in that it offers a clean slate for olfactory artworks to appear, even pleasant scents can be stigmatized in the context of the white cube. Catherine Bodmer's Bounce provides an example of what I call censorship. She wanted to disperse the scent of Bounce fabric softener, but was prevented by the gallery attendants. Despite being assured that the scent carried no danger, the attendants were intransigent. The irony is that these attendants were also chain smokers. So obviously some other kind of agenda was at play, such as odorphobia. And Clara can also talk about examples of censorship as well, if she likes. So smells pose difficulties for institutions also in regard to their documentation, collection, and preservation. Still, artists are adept at figuring out workarounds to this dilemma, such as Chrysan Stathakos' wish machine, which offered scent multiples that could be carried away to both remember the work and to use in visitors' daily lives. A second challenge for scent art is to develop a conceptual framework and terminology. The limited vocabulary for smell gives the impression that it is mainly a phenomenological experience, one that lies beyond the ability of language to encompass. There's nothing like a challenge, though, for artists and critics who have been keen to develop an olfactocentric discourse. Sissel's project, Syrup, Mon Amour, incorporates the invention of new terms, if not a whole new language, based on the smells of Paris. And then a third type of challenge for curating olfactory artworks is the variability of smell. Scents are famously subjective. People form all kinds of personal associations about smells, which can make a shared language of scent seem impossible. Any smell can be imprinted with a range of emotions. For instance, the acrid scent of skunk may be disgusting to many, but for those who smelled it during summer drives in the countryside, it may bring back pleasant memories. Socialization also creates variability. Every culture privileges some scents while disdaining others. Scents may be culturally acceptable in one context, such as garlic in the kitchen, but are deemed unacceptable in others, such as garlic in the office. Artists who address scent as a culturally loaded signifier are often confronted by differences in audience awareness. Some may understand, while others may be uninformed. Sweetgrass is important to indigenous cultures in North America, and Robert Houle uses it here for healing and reclaiming land that had been taken by European colonizers. In Majestic Splendor, Lee Bowl presents the odor of fermenting fish. While common in Korean cuisine, it was felt to be offensive to Museum of Modern Art visitors, and thus was taken down prematurely. Because variation in the act of reception, mutability could be said to characterize the very nature of olfactory aesthetics. Olfactory works are performative. They come and go, become present, and then fade. The variability of scent adds a degree of mystery to recognizing the smells of even common substances. In Sandover's synesthesia, a sequence of aromas portray the prepping, cooking, and cleaning up of a Thanksgiving dinner. Yet without the timeline, the scents may be hard to name while you're in the space. It was just a video projection, and the timeline was actually an artist's book that was available elsewhere. But in the space, it was very difficult because all the smells blended together, and so it was one of a common kind of problem with olfactory works. Given the general anosmia of Western culture, olfactory works present an opportunity to enhance the appreciation and knowledge of smell. Every encounter with an olfactory work doubles as a kind of sensory recalibration that prompts audiences to inquire into the significance of scent. Peter du Couperet uses play and humor in this concrete fuel station outfitted with nozzles that dispense the smells of grass, bubblegum, and car exhaust. It's important to note that many projects incorporate what are ostensibly bad smells. While it may be common to know the difference between a good and a bad smell, it is precisely such notions that olfactory art interrogates. Smell has often been marginalized in Western culture because of the antipathy towards bad smells. Deliberately confronting the audience with such negative smells addresses how such judgments arise. Clara's Pheromone Link provides a dating service that breaks the taboo of sniffing the body odors of strangers. And she may go into more detail about that. Most importantly, the goals of many olfactory artworks are not conclusions or answers, but what I call sensory predicaments. These are situations that are awkward, playful, or perplexing. They compel inquiries into, about, and through the senses. In a world where the senses are partitioned into separate entities or commercialized into hyper-stimulating commodities, the art context offers an opportunity to explore disruptions and enigmas. Beholders are obliged to engage their senses in agile and associative manners. And what's interesting is that prior training and education in art is generally not required. The use of senses gravitates towards a more or less populist aesthetic. That is, the works validate the same sensory skills people apply in their everyday lives. The Seventh Sense here asks visitors to sit in deck chairs and imagine exotic sea voyages through headphones and special perfumes on tabs. So what do these sensory predicaments accomplish? Well, they prompt audiences to notice and reflect upon the complexities of smell, as well as to consider smells as being more than just things to like or not like. Predicaments validate smell as an aesthetic and intellectual sense. Also, questions may arise about how perception is socially conditioned. Oops, I forgot to advance. In Scent Bar, gallery goers sign up for a questionnaire about their hopes and fears and receive a custom-made scent for their personal rejuvenation. But could one make the case that olfactory art rides the broader social trends of sensory marketing and the experience economy? That is, the entertainment and retail strategy of using enhanced sensory stimuli to increase consumption. Despite the similarities in prioritizing the senses, the difference is precisely the notion of sensory predicament. While the experience economy instrumentalizes the senses, turning every sensation into a tactic to increase sales, olfactory art employs the same senses to destabilize viewers and inquire into the construction of knowledge. For sensory predicaments, the endpoint is undetermined. They often lead to considering the larger socio-political implications of how the senses get utilized and whose interests are being served. Olfactory art functions as an important inroad to the most consequential issues of our times, such as decolonizing Western culture, promoting tolerance for difference, and addressing the imminent crisis of climate change. Amy Balkin's Public Smog extends olfactory art to its logical extreme. Seeking to create a clean air park in the sky, that's what that little rhomboid is in the center there. The artist treats the entire atmosphere as a work of art and campaigns for it to be declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. In short, olfactory art creates incongruous situations to challenge normative assumptions about perception. And by shifting the conventional sensory ratio in the museum, olfactory art forces visitors into alternative ways of perceiving, thinking, and ultimately being in the world. Well, great. Thanks so much. It's wonderful to start off this symposium with this talk.